Hello and welcome, NextGen Nation. I hope you're having a great morning so far. I'm so thrilled to be here. I'm Doug Mashkuri, Vice President and General Manager of GovLoop, and today I have the distinct pleasure of being your moderator. You are in the Public Entrepreneurship, How to Innovate Within Government and Bring New Ideas to the Table session. So I feel like a pilot. If this isn't the flight you're supposed to be on, now is a good time to find the other one, but I hope you stay with us because we got a great lineup today. What did you think of those keynotes? Really inspirational, really powerful, and I think just a great way to kick off our 13th annual summit. This is the largest summit we've done to date, and I'm just super excited for today's session. So let's talk a little bit about what we're going to be talking about today. When you leave work, do you go home with thinking about how we do things better, smarter, faster? If you have those thoughts, you're what we call a public entrepreneur. You want to find new ways to innovate your agency. You want to find ways to be better, to serve the public better. You want to find ways to make government better. And we have a great session for you today if that's how you think. We're going to leverage real-world examples from the state of California. We have rock star public sector speakers from the state of California who are going to tell you how to do that. And we're going to make you an entrepreneur in residence. And you're going to bring this back to your agency and really start innovating and evolving where your agency can go. So, as you know, with every session we are required by law to do housekeeping items, so let me get these over quickly. If you're on Twitter, please share what you're learning using the hashtag NextGenGov and share what you're learning. The Twitterverse is out there waiting for you to teach them. If you have questions, we got answers for you. So submit your questions using the Q&A tab. Or click on the group chat box on the bottom of your console, and you can start engaging with us. If you have any technical difficulties whatsoever during the training session, send a message to the Q&A tab, and my colleague Casey is here to help you. Why don't you learn more? We have a whole resources area there for additional information, including the slide deck. And this will also be on demand. So if you can't stay for the whole session today, or you want to tell your friends or colleagues about it, the on-demand version of the session will be ready by May 13th for you to view again. We're also offering CPEs. So how do you get CPEs? You get them in 3 easy steps. 1, attend the session, which you're here right now. You have to attend the live session for the full duration. There'll be 3 poll questions. You need to take all 3 poll questions throughout the training. These will appear in your slide window, and you'll click your response and then hit submit to submit your response. Lastly, complete the evaluation. The evaluation form can be found in the resource module, and it will also be emailed to you tomorrow. So that is how you get CPEs. Let's talk about our rock stars here. We have Phoebe Peranto, who's the Deputy State Chief Technology Innovation Officer for the state of California. And we have Rick Clow, who's the California Chief Technology Innovation Officer. Both have industry and government experience. They've led innovation in many places, and now they're bringing those services to the state of California. So let's get to it. With no further ado, please join me in welcoming Phoebe and Rick.
Hey, thanks, Doug. That was a wonderful introduction and hard to follow. It's wonderful to virtually see everyone today. Happy Wednesday. Rick and I are thrilled to talk about this topic. I think it's something that's very close to our hearts and is something that can be challenging for a lot of organizations, not just public sector. So here's a little roadmap of what we're going to talk through today. We typically find that showing, not telling is really effective. So we're going to give you a little background on our organization, the Office of Enterprise Technology within the state of California, what we do, what our mission is, so that you're oriented to who's talking to you and in the context within which we exercise public entrepreneurship. Then we're going to talk about public entrepreneurship and why it matters. Why should you care? You're here, which is good. That's step 0. But why does it matter in the long term, especially within the public sector? And then we're going to give you 3 case studies. And these are real life examples that Rick and I executed across the state that leverage public entrepreneurship and strategies that we're going to recommend to you around how you can start tomorrow introducing new ideas to your organizations. and then we'll leave plenty of time for open Q&A. I think we have 1 hour together, so I'm hoping that we can wrap all this goodness up in an hour. So with that, we'll get started really quickly on who we are, and I'll pass it to Rick.
Thanks so much, Phoebe. It's great to be here. I'm excited to hear from you all, either in the Q&A by text during our presentation or when we get to the end. A little bit of background. So I came to the state after a long career in the private sector. Most recently, I had been a little over 13 years at Google. The last role there, I was a partner at Google Ventures, the venture capital arm for Alphabet, Google's parent. Had taken some time off, and in January of last year got introduced to the then state CIO, who was in the midst of helping the state execute on the vaccination campaign for the state. I didn't understand necessarily why I was in the midst of that conversation. I'm not a public health guy by background, but it turned out that the issue really was a question more of data than it was of anything specific to vaccines or vaccine administration. And so for the next 6 weeks, I was a volunteer. I was just helping try and wrestle with questions of what data do we have, what data can we put to good use to improve the vaccination campaign that was in its early days. In that process, Amy, the CIO, asked if I would stick around. There was this Office of Enterprise Technology that had a vacancy. The chief role had been vacant for a bit. And that was how I came to know what OET was and what our mission was. Today, we are a team, as you can see here, of over 80 software engineers, product managers, geospatial specialists, web developers, UI, UX researchers. Really, for those of you who've spent any time in the private sector, what OET looks a lot like the product development teams that I used to run when I was a product manager at Google. Everything that OET is asked to do is to think of a product or an application that doesn't yet exist, that needs to be created, often under some time constraints, that can then be delivered to residents of California under the umbrella of a department or agency that is trying to address a particular issue. So instead of working within a particular department, we are really a horizontal team who's expected to plug in to whatever department or agency has the most important, most impactful challenges and doesn't have either the time or the internal resources to address that themselves. But the nature of the work that we have been asked to do sort of requires that we don't wait for a 12, a 24, 36-month procurement cycle to try and tackle that. So some of the case studies that Phoebe mentioned that we'll be talking about really embody how that is made manifest in the work that we do at OET. Last couple of notes. The way we work is really to try and understand the problem before we assume that we know what the solution has to look like. We then work with, hopefully, minimum viable products that we can validate. Does that solution in fact address the problem in a way that is consistent with our principles? We love to leverage open source software, not only because it limits the costs associated with the work that we do, but it then means that others can benefit from what we do if we turn around and then release what we've done for others to benefit. And we'll talk a little bit about that as well. And then lastly, we really try hard to make sure that we are not the ones who are expected to have all the answers. Often it's the departments or agencies that we work with who know exactly what the end result needs to look like. They just may not have the internal resources to build it. But if you ask them, what would great look like, they generally can give you a pretty good answer. So it's our job to make sure that we listen and then often listen to residents who, if they are the ones trying to navigate a benefits portal or an application, they've generally got a pretty good sense of what would get them to done in a way that doesn't frustrate them or require them to take too much time. So in a nutshell, that's OET. We sit in the Department of Technology, which is a larger organization. It is both a service provider to the state, as well as what California refers to as a control agency, where we provide some oversight across the state in best practices of making sure that dollars and implementations are done well and consistent with best practices.
Great. Thanks, Rick. I think it was a really good introduction of what your organization does. We'll do a quick level set. Here's our first poll, and we're going to talk about public entrepreneurship, but let's see where our audience is today. So here's our first poll. What I'm going to do is read the question. You're going to click your choice, then hit submit. So let's see, what is public entrepreneurship? Is it private sector sells products and services to the public sector? Is it public sector builds products for the private sector? Is it public sector employees seek new and innovative ways to solve public challenges? Or is it public-private partnership to invent the flying car? I wish that was it. I don't think that is it, but vote for what you think is best. I'll give you a few more seconds to take this, and then we'll jump to the results, and then we'll talk about defining what public entrepreneurship is. So once again, what is public entrepreneurship? Pick your choice, and remember to hit submit so your poll goes through. And let's see, we're almost there. I'll give you about 10 more seconds to check it out. And once again, I don't know if we're talking about flying cars today, but if we did, it would be pretty cool. All right, well, let's see what the audience thinks. All right, we got it. 92% are talking about how public entrepreneurship is public sector's employees seeking new and innovative ways to solve public challenges. For the 6.3%, let's hold out hope for that flying car, but I don't think we'll be covering it today. So let's get to our next slide.
Awesome. Thanks, Doug. I personally voted for flying car, so I'm really glad that everyone else also was on board. You guys are right. It's absolutely true. So at its fundamental level, public entrepreneurship is really the process of introducing innovation, the generation and implementation of new ideas into the public sector. So if we were to boil it down, that's what it is. It's bringing new ideas to the table. It can be scary in the public sector because it requires experimentation and an openness to failing, and failing being an indicator of learning and improvement. And sometimes that is not something that feels particularly comfortable within the public sector, but we promise is very possible. And what's fascinating about public entrepreneurship is that more than ever, it is becoming critical in the public sector. And the reason for that is multifold, but let's just touch on the highlights. There are just new expectations for the public sector in how we respond to and solve problems. And a lot of us are facing even more complex problems than we could have ever imagined. These new expectations, as many of us know, were bolstered by a collective action when it came to COVID. And Rick will talk a little bit more about our approach there and how we thought through that with the digital COVID vaccine record. But there are groundswells of experience and situations that have elevated what the public expects of the government and how quickly that we should be responding and how we should be responding in terms of, is it tech first? Is it digital first? So the old way of doing things, the way we used to think that things should get done, no longer satisfies the needs of our residents and our end users. So that means that we need public entrepreneurs or people who are embracing new ideas, bringing new ideas to the table in the public sector, so that there is a quorum of people who are all doing this in kind of a coordinated way. The thing that's fascinating about public entrepreneurship is that, I don't know about your organizations, but in our organization, there's a widely held realization that government does need to be nimbler and it does need to work faster. But being actually open to those new ideas can be something that's challenging or doesn't feel natural. And so really navigating that fine line of recognizing that we need to be different and we need to operate more efficiently with, oh, that's a little scary because new ideas mean that risk is introduced, is something that Rick and I have, I don't know if we've honed, but we've certainly encountered, and we have some fantastic takeaways for you guys on how to think through that. But before that, I think we have a little poll.
We do. If I could find my unmute button here. So yes, so let's go to our next poll here. This is your current organization open to new ideas and innovation? Yes, no, depends on the topic area. And once again, we're trying to get an idea of, how open is the organization to change, to new ideas. And so once again, is your current organization open to new ideas and innovation? Yes, no, or depends on the topic. I'll give you a few more seconds. We're getting a bunch of things coming in right now. All right, we'll go one more second. Remember to hit submit once you pick your choice. And let's see what the survey says. 31% yes. Really interesting, only about 8% no, but looks like there's a lot, 60%, it depends on the topic area. That doesn't surprise me. I think these things are hard to navigate in your organization, and we'll probably talk through some of these challenges now. So let's jump over to the next slide.
Thank you, Doug. What I thought I would do is share with you a quick synopsis of something that our team did last year. The benefits are still being felt, and in fact, the impact is expanding. I'll explain what I mean by that in a moment. So as I mentioned, I came to the state in January, first as a volunteer, and then appointed in February. And because we were primarily working on COVID-related initiatives for the first half of last year, we were spending a lot of time partnered with the Department of Public Health. And as I was watching, my in-laws live with us. They were the first to be eligible to get a COVID vaccine. I watched in January as they brought home 2 pieces of paper that said they'd gotten a vaccine. And it seemed odd to me that in 2021, this modern miracle of science that had been approved in under a year, that the only way we could prove to someone else that this dose had been administered was a piece of paper with a CDC logo on it and some ink, that, as we have now seen over the last year, among other things, is easily forgeable. And it struck me that we probably could do better. But when we think about what you've heard in the prior slides about the definition of public entrepreneurship and what it means to try and create something new, we realized that we were operating in an environment where no one really knew necessarily what the right answer would be or what good would look like. So what we started with was a very simple question, which was, do we want to offer California residents access to information about their COVID vaccines that is not purely paper-based? And of course, the answer to that question was, well, yeah, if we could, that would be great. Because pretty much from the first day we started putting doses in people's arms, we heard stories about, I put it through the wash, I lost it, I thought it was in my pocket, but it fell out when I pulled my phone out of the pocket, and suddenly I don't have any way to prove that I've been vaccinated. And as I looked ahead and had started hearing about some of the plans that the governor and the Department of Public Health were putting forward about reopening the state in June, one of the core components was encouraging venues, concert halls, sports arenas, bars, restaurants, would want to be able to have people who want to get indoors or inside the gates to be able to prove that they've been vaccinated, and that would be the trade. That the state would say, if you can do that, we will know that that collection of people is safe, and we will allow that to happen. And yet, if people had lost their card or forgotten it at home, they wouldn't have any easy way to do that. So we proposed, first in a memo, we just wrote about a 3-page memo that said, if you want this, we think we could do it. Tell us if you see any reasons that we shouldn't. And by asking the question early on, and then encouraging conversation, not about the solution, which is where I think a lot of people get hung up, but about the outcome. What would success look like? Because if we all agree on what the end result should be, all we're asking you, leadership, to do is empower us to figure out what that solution should be. And where we have seen a number of these conversations get really stuck is where people think their job is to discuss and debate the solution. Where entrepreneurship is often highly successful in its best cases is where you can get agreement on what the outcome should be and then encourage people to empower the team responsible for getting to that outcome to go and figure it out. Because otherwise you're going to have a lot of contributions, a lot of voices in the room debating, well, I think the button should be that size. I think that it should be this color. Lots of things that ultimately don't matter, but are going to slow things down. And we knew we had compressed time. I mentioned the June reopening. We knew that that was going to be the time that if we were going to have a solution, we needed to build to that goal. So we originally proposed the memo I mentioned, we circulated in April, which was about 3 weeks after the first set of questions had been asked. By May 1st, our team at OET had started writing code, which we ended up shipping to the public 6 weeks later. That application in California has now served over 15 million digital vaccine records to over 8 million California residents. I mentioned leveraging open source tools and expanding impact outside of just the state of California. We released our code to the public domain in September. So we shipped in June, made sure that it worked, that it was stable, and then we started having conversations with other states who wanted to do what we had done. There are now 4 states that have deployed our code for their residents. We've got 3 other states that we think will be launching in the next few weeks, and another 20 states who have adopted the same open source framework that we implemented, but using their own code to do so. So now more than half of all states, but more than 80% of the US population have access to the same digital COVID vaccine record QR code that we originally launched in June. So I want to pause there for this particular exercise. We'll be happy to answer questions about that, but really focus on a couple of the key takeaways. Ask questions early, get agreement on what the outcome should be, empower a team responsible for finding the solution to the outcome without lots of other voices suggesting that they think they have a better answer for the solution. If we all agree that if we get to the outcome, we've done a good thing, then we really shouldn't care which of the many possible solutions we take. And then building on those successes so that if you do in fact get to the outcome, figure out ways to magnify its impact.
That's awesome. Thanks, Rick. You're going to hear us, like broken records, say some of the same takeaways, and that's because they work. So with this next case study, so we have 2 more case studies. We're hoping these are really helpful in actually making some of this feel tangible for people, because oftentimes we find that recommending you be innovative doesn't really mean much. And so we have a couple more. We're going to talk about digital forms, and then we're going to talk about infrastructure. And you're going to hear some of the same takeaways, but we're hoping that they're valuable. So In this case, this is a real world example. Unlike the digital COVID vaccine record, this is still an ongoing project. So you're catching us at a really interesting inflection point. But I think that what's most critical here is the setup. So the problem that we're facing is that the state of California, and I'm sure all of you face this, has a lot of manual forms. Lots of forms. You got to fill out, print out, mail back, return. And at the end of the day, form sounds like a pretty small part of something that would impact a resident's daily life, but it just turns out that it impacts their ability to access critical government services. And by introducing friction into that process, by asking someone who might not even have a printer to go print something out and then mail it back and pay for postage, et cetera, it is delaying that individual's access to critical services. And that's something that we just don't stand for in the state of California. And so we started to observe this, but what's most critical here, and something that Rick pointed out with the digital COVID vaccine record, is that scoping the problem and using data to drive what the scope of that problem looks like and to influence key stakeholders is really critical. So we started from there, because what we didn't want to do was build a solution that we thought was the right solution, instead of actually understanding what the problem was and what residents were facing. So we started out by sending out a survey, super easy, really quick to fill out. We did this internally to primary stakeholders within the California state government, because we really wanted to quantify what the surface area of the problem was. And that's how we came to a lot of the data that helped us drive our ultimate recommendation and problem scope. So we distributed a really simple survey, took a minute. I think we did it in Google surveys. So super easy, really straightforward to set up. We asked people about their agencies and departments and how many forms they thought they had and how many people they served. And then we were able to come together on a data-driven argument around, here's how many forms in the state government that exist that need to be manually filled out. Here's the number of residents that impacts on an annual basis, which, as a spoiler alert, is tens of millions of people. And here's the projected amount of cost that it's taking taxpayer dollars to manage and administer these forms. And so that helped us better understand what outcome we were trying to solve for. So one of the major takeaways here is that data doesn't lie, and it's really hard to argue with. And so when you're setting up a problem and it's a new idea, think of really lightweight, super quick ways to get a lot of data around your product or problem, and then synthesize that into a problem statement. Because what's so much easier to do is to point back to data to show and validate that you're focusing on the right thing, versus pointing to gut instincts, which is something that a lot of folks in the public sector and private sector often use to solve problems. I feel. Instead, we want to say, here's what the user is telling us. Here's what's actually the state of the world, and here are the numbers to back it up. And so we found that that was really helpful validation in the process of determining how many forms we had, the cost, and how long it took to administer them, because that directly impacts how people can easily access critical services. So from there, if you think about it, we'd already asked all of those key stakeholders within the government to fill out a survey. So they already were kind of primed and seated around this idea. So when we came back to them to ask if anyone wanted to be a pilot partner for a digital forms solution that we were going to build for the state, folks just came out of the woodwork quickly, because this wasn't a crazy new idea they'd never heard of before. This was something that they already felt invested in. And so if there is a way to gather information about a problem that you're solving, and to also involve stakeholders early on in the process in a very lightweight way, such that they feel invested in the outcome, then you've already started the process of public entrepreneurship more effectively. You've put yourself in a really good position to then execute long term. So we're currently in a position with this where we're building for an MVP, so a minimum viable product that we will launch internally with 2 pilot partners. And from there, assuming that that pilot goes well, we will scale that out to all of our departments and agencies here at the state of California. I think what's important to note here is that this problem at both the state level, the local level, and the federal level has been something that's eaten away at people. It's a really difficult problem to solve. And one might imagine Google and SurveyMonkey already solved this problem of figuring out how to build a form really easily. And the fact of the matter is that we understand there are constraints and limitations within the government that don't allow for implementing technology like that. And sometimes those specific agencies and departments have needs that are regulatory or compliance oriented that we need to be conscious of. And so bringing in new ideas into the public sector while also recognizing and appreciating the limitations of the government apparatus is something that we're very conscious of. And by stating the problem and scoping the problem up front, especially using data, we're able to nod to that appreciation and recognize that there are some boundaries that we need to work within. So that's digital forms. And Rick is going to close us out with his final case study.
Yeah, as Phoebe mentioned, there's some repetition and or reflection through a number of these. The through line, I tend to think sort of systemically, really is to think in terms of building blocks. What can we build that is not just reusable, but leverageable and creates compounding advantage over time? One of the first conversations I had when I came into this role at the beginning of last year was understanding that our team, one of the many responsibilities our team has is for hosting a number of sites that live within the ca.gov domain. In total today, it's about 70 sites. That is a fraction of the total number of websites that the state government operates, but it is increasing. And one of the first comments that folks shared with me was the fact that it is so decentralized is itself a challenge. Because if an edict comes down that says all state sites must do X, and all state sites actually live in 37 different places, you're not doing X, you're doing 37X. So the repetition and the confirmation that whatever it is that you need to do is done completely and consistently, particularly when there are different environments that are managing those sites, it's a very, very hard problem to solve. So I started with our sites, the 70 or so that OET is responsible for maintaining, and asked, well, where do they physically live? And the answer was in like 5 different places. There was a commercial web host over here. There was an internal server over there. There was a new environment that was being stood up that was going to be built on AWS. All of these running WordPress, but WordPress in physically distinct places. And we thought, well, that seems inefficient. And everybody said, oh yeah, it's definitely inefficient. I said, and it doesn't seem like it's a great use of our time. And they're like, no, it's definitely a bad use of our time. I'm like, okay, why aren't we putting this all in one place? Well, we've had some sort of contradictory guidance about where things need to be or how things need to run. So we thought, all right, well, let's start with the end in mind. If we were doing this from scratch, what would success look like? And the answer clearly, inarguably, was everything should be in one place. I'm like, okay, should that be in any one of the places that we're currently managing? And there was some healthy debate about whether one of the current 5 places hosting some of these WordPress sites was in fact the place that it needed to be. But in each case, when we agreed what the criteria for evaluating what a successful ultimate landing place would look like, none of the current environments checked all the boxes. I'm sure you've heard, if you have any friends that work in California state government, something that California talks about a fair amount is we're the 5th largest economy in the world. We have a large population of people that rely on the information that we communicate out to our residents, travelers, businesses, other governments. We need those sites to be up and resilient and performant. We need them to be secure. If a bad actor wanted to deface a site that had critical information during a crisis, I don't know, say during a pandemic, that would be potentially fatal. If people were given bad information or missing critical information. We've had cases where people are relying on real-time maps about locations of fires and evacuations and which roads are closed as wildfires sweep through the state. We can't have those sites go down. So we turned, instead of saying, well, we've got all this current existing infrastructure, we'll just need to deal with what we've got. And we started with the end in mind and said, let's define outstanding, and then let's figure out what needs to happen in order to get to outstanding. We ultimately partnered with WordPress VIP, which is the company that makes WordPress, a company called Automatic. WordPress itself is open source software, but WordPress VIP is a hosting environment designed for high traffic, high demand, highly resilient, secure websites, some of the most trafficked websites in the world. And they also offer access to the WordPress development team directly, which becomes tremendously helpful when we're trying to figure out how to make some sort of core infrastructure systemic decisions about the sites that we're managing and what we can do to improve them over time. So I mentioned building blocks. One of the things that really becomes exciting for us as we centralize the migrations from many places to one place and then absorb additional sites that are currently living elsewhere around the state onto this one environment is then the other things we can layer on top of this, like translations. More than 25% of California's residents do not speak English either at all or well. We need to ensure that the information we direct out to the public is available in the language that they speak. Well, translating content at scale, if it's manual, not only time consuming, it's expensive and it's hard. What if we could take this infrastructure layer that we've built and said, if you host content with us on this system, you can push that button. And that will then make sure that this web page is available in these other 7 languages. And you don't have to think about it. And that will be part of our service offering that we're offering back out to anyone across the state. If you're building a form, that form can be easily integrated in the website that you maintain if it's public facing. So we're trying to think of modular components that can fit together, but can also sit distinctly so that they don't create these large dependencies where everything has to land all at once. We can work on web content management, we can work on forms, we can work on digital identity, we can work on the vaccine record system, and they will plug in different ways over time, but they will also deliver on the individual outcomes that we agreed at the outset were the things that we really cared about delivering for the state. So I'm going to pause there. I see a bunch of questions have come in, so I'm excited to move in. I think we have a final wrap-up slide, and then we'll get to a final poll, and then we'll go into Q&A.
Yes. Rick shared quite a few of our takeaways, so we won't over-index for folks, but if you remember nothing from this whole time together, please remember these 4 things. Okay. And we'll talk about these in great detail. I agree. The questions that are coming in are fantastic and are exactly what we expected. So that's lovely. But how do you do this tactically tomorrow? Okay. So Showing, not telling. Narratives and storytelling, especially from the perspective of the user, are really effective tools, especially when it comes to influencing folks who've said, we tried that before and it never worked, or we're really used to doing something X way and we don't really want to try the new Y way. Showing, not telling is really effective. Driving decision-making with data, not instincts. If I could, I think that I would change my middle name to Data. So data is super effective when you are not only scoping a problem, but you're also trying to make an argument. I saw a question that was around, even the best memos just aren't compelling. And I would agree. Memos are rough. They're long and they're really, really dense when it comes to writing. And so what we often try to do is we try to lead with data because that is inarguable, right? And math generally is a universal language. And so that's really helpful for people to understand and to see the scope of an impact. Start small, then test and iterate. We're really explicit about trying things on a experimentation on a really big scale is not only super scary, but it also then opens up the government to potential risk. And so what we want to do is try to minimize that risk while also trying new things and failing quickly to then learn. And then finally, this is a bonus point, but something that both Rick and I experienced at Google and that we've also implemented here at the Office of Enterprise Technology. And that's asking for time in your day to work on new ideas. And I also recognize that this is something that would have to be amenable to the organization that you work in. And not everyone works in an organization where this is an option. But there are some framing techniques that you can use around, I'm thinking about this really critical problem that we're facing as an organization. And I would like, 1 hour every day of my week, so 5 hours a week to focus on this and to think about a solution that would really work for us. So if you're wondering how you take this into your Thursday, my suggestion is to consistently revisit this list if you can. It's also read the room. We recognize that not every manager is super open to this at first, and it takes a little bit of time. So it's all possible, though. Everything is possible here, we promise. Rick and I certainly didn't walk into the Office of Enterprise Technology and just start throwing around new ideas and expecting people to take them on. So trust us that we recognize it's a process. Okay, and then I think we have one final poll. Is that right, Doug?
Yeah, we do, and thank you. We're going to jump into Q&A in a second, but I love that last slide because we always talk about when we do trainings, we want to cover high-level topics, but we also want to give you something practical and tactical to take to your agency tomorrow. And that slide was it. And I agree. I think all those points are something we can all do. So let's jump into our last poll before we get into Q&A. And the poll is, when can you start practicing public entrepreneurship in your organization? Is it today, immediately, tomorrow, next year, hopefully not next century? But once again, find your answer, click submit. Once again, when can you start practicing public entrepreneurship? Today, tomorrow, next year, next century. Give you a few more seconds, and then we're going to jump into Q&A. But when we get to the Q&A part, we're going to start with some broader questions and then jump to very specific. But the level of engagement in our Q&A and chat has been awesome, so I really appreciate everyone's engagement today. So let's see what our results look like. All right, message delivered. You did it, Rick and Phoebe. You got us motivated. You got us feeling innovative and entrepreneurial. And I love seeing that. All right, so let's jump into questions. I'm going to start with a broader question of, we talk about innovation. We talk about, telling the data story and not using your instincts. So one question here is, how do you navigate innovation when so many folks are not open to change? What's your experience showed you in that area?
I'll take a crack at answering. I think in our experience, over the last year and a half, the thread of we do these things this way, this is the way it's always been done, we've certainly heard that. But if you pull on that thread, what that's really telling you is that this is the way that people have figured out that they won't make things worse. We know that we won't break something. And so it can be risk aversion to a fault, but it also is this is a well-worn path, and it has a predictable, in a good sense, a predictable outcome. Where we're often focused is trying to identify the greenfield areas that are not fundamentally undoing or redoing the way a thing works, where there is real risk because you're forcing people to move away from a thing that they know what that will produce, they know what outcome that will be. And instead, it's trying to paint a picture that says, we are proposing this outcome will be worth doing. Do we agree that if we could do that, forget for a moment how we might, don't worry about that. Can we all agree that this outcome that we are proposing would be highly desirable? Because if I can get people to agree on that, then I'm creating space for my team to try and prove that they're capable of producing that outcome. And what that then creates is a little bit more trust for the next time you ask another question about, what about that outcome over there? And it becomes incremental. In the spirit of never wasting a crisis, what we did with the digital vaccine record last spring and summer unquestionably gave us credibility that allowed us to ask other questions in other venues where we had proven that given a little bit of time, literally 6 weeks from first line of code to shipping to the public, we could build things that worked, that solved the problem that we had promised, and had an even greater outcome than we had predicted. So I think in that way, it's creating a little bit of space. And the best news of all, to Phoebe's point about using data, is that you're creating a yardstick that is inarguable. Like, we agreed. If we could get to that outcome, we'd all be happy. And the data tells us we got to the outcome. So your end of the bargain, leadership, management, whomever, is to be happy. Because that's what we agreed when we asked the question.
Yeah, I think it's a great response. And, some of this is culture change and bringing a different culture into the organization. There's a question about trust that you kind of already answered. So I want to build on that, though. If we look at Phoebe's tips at the end, once again, most importantly, using data to tell your story. I agree with you, Rick. That's hard to debate data, right? So that's going to build trust of someone coming in, telling a data story, not relying on this is how we used to do it. So for the person that asked a question about trust, trust is built many ways, but it really is employing those tips, because then everything is addressable and you can have that conversation and get that agreement on the outcome up front. So here's another question that I thought was really interesting. It's a little bit of a long question, so bear with me. Often in government, we want to improve and deliver programs simpler, faster, and better. Put simply, we want to deliver some services more like private sector, but moving from legacy systems to adopting something new has more risk than staying with status quo. Overall, how do you advise pitching and getting senior management to buy in to try something new, even on an interim basis?
Yeah, I mean, I can start this conversation, certainly. So I would take a big step back. I think a big component of this is building that trust initially, because someone is not going to trust you to try something new if they don't know what you're trying to solve for and who you are and what your motivations are, and if you care about what they care about. And so something that we always do and is consistent, sorry, my dog clearly wants to interact with everyone here.
Yes.
Yeah, mini golden doodle showing up for this session. But what we find is the case across all of the case studies that we shared is that we start by asking questions. Because assuming that something needs to be different, even if you observe it and you know it's deeply broken, observing is not as effective as asking. And what we do is we'll typically canvas the user. So we'll ask, through surveys or one-on-one interviews or focus sessions. And what that does is a couple of things. It uncovers insights around what's actually broken and what people need. And it also provides people a sense of ownership over an outcome because their opinion has been asked. So oftentimes what we find is when people say, that's scary, I don't want to do something new, what they're actually saying is, no one asked me if I really wanted to do something new. And so I immediately have a knee-jerk reaction to that thing because no one asked me and it could impact me. But when you listen to people, there is this new bond that's formed that is certainly driven by trust, and especially customer trust, right? Because at the end of the day, that's your customer, that helps with laying the groundwork around introducing new ideas. It also helps with, I'm going to introduce a new idea, and here's why I'm going to introduce a new idea, because these 15 other agencies and departments in anecdotal feedback told me the same thing. They all need this thing, right? So there's power in patterns. And then you're able to use those patterns to make arguments around incremental or new change. I think a second component of this outside of trust is to genuinely start small and to think of innovative ways to test ideas without interrupting people's daily work life. Because I think that Rick and I have observed that as long as we don't interrupt someone's daily workday, they don't really mind if we try new things. As long as they're able to do their job, as long as we don't take the internet down on their behalf, as long as we don't impact their ability to deliver for their end user, then there's not a whole lot of opposition to trying new things. And so we find that process of scoping the problem and then thinking of creative ways to kind of get quick wins, right? In really light touch ways that doesn't impact the end user, but can show them what the potential of that outcome could look like is really important. And I know that's very problem by problem based, but oftentimes there are ways to do that that are really light touch and super effective. Rick, do you have anything else to add to this question?
I think they're great points. I mean, you know as well as I do, we could talk all day about this, but I know we've got a couple more questions and probably only about 5 minutes left. So I'll mute myself and give Doug a chance to get us another question or two.
Okay.
All right, great. We have probably time for one more, a few closing things. So here's an interesting question. We talked earlier about minimal viable product, and someone said, how do you move beyond that? This person feels that they find they get to the MVP, but we never revisit it. So any tips or advice on how to move beyond that?
I've got two thoughts, and I actually want to give a shout out to our colleague in California government, the Chief Data Officer, Joy Bonaguro, who shared with us a blog post she'd written a couple of years ago about distinguishing between the minimum viable product and the minimum political product. In government, sometimes the product you've been asked to build is less to solve an actual problem than it is to solve a political problem or take advantage of a political opportunity. And the first time I read it, it was this huge light bulb went off of understanding, yeah, no, that's a brilliant distinction, because in our private sector worlds, we only ever think about, or I only ever thought about, minimum viable product, because I always understood as a product manager, my job was to solve the problem that was most impactful for as many users as possible in the best, most efficient way. Sometimes, if what you're facing is a political challenge, the inputs are different and the outputs are different. So I wanted to just draw that distinction. If you Google Joy's name and minimum political product, you'll find the essay she wrote. But on the MVP side, I think it has to start with a shared understanding of stakeholders of, do we actually agree on what the problem is? I've often seen that if somebody believes their job is to figure out the solution, they just go right to the solution. And they just heads down, banging away, writing code, trying different things, only to realize weeks or months later that, oh, the person I'm talking to doesn't agree with me what the end result should be. So we need to have agreement on what is that problem, because then the data can help us understand, well, we're going to quantify what broken looks like today. We're going to get agreement that, well, this is the data that shows that the current state of the world just isn't working. And then the MVP will give us the first indication that the needle is moving. We haven't solved it. We haven't made it go away, but we've tested this hypothesis that if we do this thing, this problem that we're focused on with some metric that is instrumented that shows us that it's currently broken is a little bit better. And then gives us permission to iterate and either widen the aperture of the people that we're bringing into the product, or expanding the scope of the product so it tackles a bigger part of the problem space. As far as when to stop iterating, I mean, if you've agreed on the solution, if you've agreed on the scope of the problem and you've agreed on the data that you're using to instrument, the point at which you see diminishing returns, that's when you should agree, like, we're going to declare victory. We're going to move on. If we got 80, 90% of the way there, it might take us another 2 years to finish that final 10%, and that might not be worth it.
Great advice. I did put the article that you mentioned, Rick, into the attendee chat, so folks, please check that out. It's a really good blog post. I hate to stop this, but I have to because we are out of time. Rick and Phoebe, thank you so much. This was an awesome session. I have been writing feverishly notes here and learned so much. The feedback from our audience has been very positive, really great tips and advice for them to bring back to their agency tomorrow. So much appreciated. I have a few closing things to do, otherwise I will get yelled at by our director, so let me jump to those. Once again, thanks to Phoebe and Rick for a really informative session. Tons of learning going on. I want to thank our partner alliances for their support of NextGen this year. Without them, this is not possible. What's next? So upcoming next is our lunch keynotes. We'll begin at 12:30 Eastern. You can access session to the conference hall in the main environment. We're going to be talking about how to get your work done and still be innovative, have successful strategies for a rewarding career, and relearning how to learn. That's interesting. So please join us for lunch, grab a drink, grab some food, and come back for lunch. Once again, check out our exhibit area. You can get on our leaderboard. Don't forget about your CP evaluation. That'll be sent to you. I already talked about this stuff, so we can go past that one. And once again, on behalf of GovLoop and our awesome speakers today, thank you for joining this session. We appreciate your time. We appreciate your public service. I hope you have a great day. Check out as many sessions as you can. And as a reminder, All these sessions will be on demand. You'll be getting follow-up emails from us, so you can watch this one again or attend ones you weren't able to do. Have a great day. Enjoy the rest of the summit. And once again, thank you for your public service. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Take care.